"My name is Luna." They cropped me out from the family portrait. Then, I handed my parents an envelope. How one photograph revealed more about my family than decades of memories ever could. It is a story of betrayal, humiliation, and the kind of revenge that doesn't come with shouting matches or broken glass, but with quiet precision and undeniable justice. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Sunday morning. My family had gathered at my parents' house for brunch, a ritual they insisted upon at least once a month. My parents loved appearances, and every gathering had to be perfectly curated, matching outfits, polished smiles, and pictures that looked like magazine spreads. That day, they unveiled a framed family portrait, recently taken during my brother's engagement celebration. I stood among them when the picture was first presented, sipping coffee, unaware of what was about to unfold. My mother beamed with pride, holding up the portrait for everyone to admire. At first glance, it was beautiful. Everyone looked so happy, so united. But when my eyes drifted toward the side where I had stood during the photo session, my stomach dropped. I wasn't there, not just pushed to the side, not blurred by poor lighting, completely erased, cropped out as though I had never been there at all. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely, they had chosen a different shot, one where maybe I had stepped away. But as I looked closer, I realized that the background, where I had stood, had been carefully edited. My dress in elegant emerald green was gone, my shoes gone, my hand, which had rested on my sister's shoulder, erased and replaced with perfectly blended airbrushed scenery. The portrait now showed my parents, my brother, his fiancée, and my sister smiling radiantly, but there was no trace of me. As though I had never belonged in that moment. As though my existence was a blemish they had chosen to remove. At first, I didn't say anything. I simply stood there, gripping my coffee cup a little tighter, forcing a smile as everyone admired the portrait. My mother commented on how lovely it would look in the living room, and my father nodded proudly. My sister giggled and said she couldn't wait to post it online. And then, one by one, my family started taking pictures of the portrait with their phones, eager to share it with friends, relatives, and social media followers. And there I stood, invisible in my own family. The weight of it hit me in waves. It wasn't just a photo, it was a statement, a declaration that my presence was optional, that I was disposable, that I didn't fit the image they wanted to project. My mind raced with questions. Why would they do this? What had I done to deserve it? But deep down I already knew the answer. It wasn't about what I had done, it was about who I wasn't. I had always been different from my siblings, where my brother pursued a prestigious career in finance and my sister excelled in high society circles. I had chosen a less conventional path. I worked in environmental research, a field that wasn't glamorous, but deeply meaningful to me. My parents, however, saw it differently. They saw it as a failure to reach their standards of wealth, status, and recognition. Over the years, their comments had grown sharper, their praise more selective. They celebrated my brother's promotions, my sister's travels, their expensive purchases and glamorous connections. And me, I was the quiet one, the one they labeled as too serious or too focused on causes nobody cares about. But this, cropping me out of a family portrait, that was no careless oversight, that was deliberate. When the brunch ended, I went home in silence, clutching the pit in my stomach like a stone I couldn't swallow. That night, as I scrolled through social media, I saw it. The picture, posted by my sister, captioned with glowing words about family unity and celebrating love. Hundreds of likes poured in, comments praised how beautiful we all looked. Not one person seemed to notice that someone was missing. Not one person realized the family was incomplete. That was when the shift happened inside me. The kind of shift you can't reverse once it begins. I had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the one who avoided confrontation. But being erased not just from a photograph, but from their idea of who we were as a family was a betrayal too deep to ignore. So I started planning, not the kind of revenge that came from anger or impulse, but the kind that comes from clarity and precision. The kind that doesn't just sting, it leaves a lasting mark. The first step was simple. I didn't say anything. No accusations, no confrontation. I kept attending family gatherings, smiling politely, and pretending everything was normal. Meanwhile, I began to collect things, memories, documents, little pieces of my life that they had overlooked or dismissed. Because if my family believed I was invisible, they were about to see how wrong they were. And when the day came, they wouldn't just see me. They'd see everything they had tried to erase louder, sharper, and more undeniable than they ever imagined. The envelope was the key, the one I would hand to them when the time was right. And inside it was something that would not only rewrite their version of who I was, but change the way everyone else saw them too. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before that day came, I had to let the hurt settle, let the betrayal crystallize into something stronger. I had to prepare and, most of all, I had to wait for the perfect moment. The days following the brunch were heavy with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the suffocating weight of unspoken truths. I went about my daily life work, errands, chores, yet every time I glanced in the mirror, I couldn't help but imagine myself erased. Just like in that photo, my reflection looked back at me, real and undeniable, but my family had chosen to pretend otherwise. I knew better than to confront them immediately. Experience had taught me how these conversations would go. My mother would feign innocence, claiming it was a simple editing error. My father would accuse me of being dramatic. My siblings would laugh, brushing it off as a joke I had taken too seriously. They would gaslight me until I began to question my own memory of standing there, posing, smiling, but I wasn't imagining it. I had been there. I had been part of that day, that memory, that moment, and now, I was going to make sure they never forgot it again. The first step in my plan was gathering proof, not just of the cropped photo, but of everything my family had done to diminish me over the years. This wasn't about one picture. It was about a pattern. Years of snide remarks, dismissive glances, forgotten birthdays, and passive-aggressive comments about my career. Years of my achievements being overshadowed by my siblings' more impressive lives. I started with my own archives. On my laptop, I scrolled through hundreds of photos from family events, vacations, and holidays. Again and again, I saw it. I was either shoved to the side, partially cut off, or blurred into the background. I had never noticed before, not fully, but now, it was obvious. They had always treated me like an afterthought, even in captured memories. Then came the social media posts. I saved screenshots of every family picture my siblings had shared. Over the years, posts that painted a picture of perfect unity, where I was either minimized or missing altogether. In some, I had been replaced with decorations or props. In others, the cropping was subtle but intentional, like a digital eraser had removed me inch by inch. Each screenshot went into a carefully organized folder on my computer, labeled not with anger but with precision. Erased memories. But my plan wasn't just about exposing what they had done. It was about showing who I really was, the person they had tried to reduce to a background figure. I compiled records of my accomplishments not for my ego, but as evidence. Academic achievements, volunteer work, the environmental research I had dedicated years of my life to, articles I had written, presentations I had given, projects I had led. None of which my family had acknowledged, none of which had made it to their curated version of who we were. As the folder grew, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Strength. Quiet, deliberate strength. I was no longer reacting to what they had done. I was preparing for what I was going to do. Meanwhile, I played the part of the dutiful daughter. I called my mother once a week, pretending not to notice her cheerful avoidance of the topic. I congratulated my brother on his wedding plans and complimented my sister on her latest social media posts. I laughed at their stories, nodded at their boasts, and smiled through every casual dismissal, because the best revenge isn't loud. It's silent, patient, unfolding so slowly they don't see it coming until it's far too late to undo. The envelope came next. I bought a sleek, ivory one, not too flashy, but elegant enough to command attention. Inside, I placed a rant, not a plea, but a statement, a concise account of how I had been treated, supported by undeniable proof. Attached were copies of the cropped photographs, screenshots of social media posts, and a summary of my achievements they had ignored. But that was only the beginning. The real reveal wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about exposing the hypocrisy of the image they projected to the world, an image of unity, pride, and unconditional love. And I knew exactly when and where to do it. My brother's wedding, the one event my parents were counting on to cement their reputation as the perfect family, the one day they couldn't afford for anything to go wrong. That was when I would hand them the envelope, not privately, not in anger, but at a moment so public, so monumental, that the truth could not be ignored. But for now, I waited. Each day, I refined my plan, collected more evidence, and reminded myself of one thing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my place, my identity, my worth, and when the day came, I wouldn't just be part of the picture. I would be the one holding it, showing everyone what they had tried so hard to erase. The weeks leading up to the wedding carried an energy that was almost cinematic. My family's excitement spilled across social media with perfectly curated post-cake tastings, floral arrangements, fittings for the bride and groom, and smiling group photos where I was conveniently absent. It was as if they were preparing for a show, and the wedding was the grand finale, where their perfect family image would be cemented in front of friends, relatives, and influential guests. I was expected to attend, of course, not as someone important, but as background decor, accessory to fill a chair and clap at the right moments. The thought burned, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I smiled through every call, every message, every detail about how perfect the event was shaping up to be, because I knew something they didn't. I knew that perfection was about to shatter. I poured myself into finalizing my evidence. The folder titled Erased Memories had grown considerably, holding years of overlooked slights and dismissals. But I wanted something more powerful than just photographs and screenshots. I wanted impact, something that would force everyone to confront the truth, not just read about it. So I commissioned a professional photographer. I sent them candid images of myself smiling, working, traveling, living, and had them digitally recreate the original family portrait the way it should have been. Me, standing exactly where I had been, fully present, not cropped, not erased, not minimized. The final result was breathtaking. It wasn't just a photo, it was a statement, proof of what had been stolen from me. I printed it on high-quality canvas, ensuring it looked elegant, timeless, something that could hang in any home. Then, I wrapped it in soft ivory paper, placed it in a protective box, and slipped it inside the envelope. It would be the last thing they'd expect to see. Meanwhile, I prepared myself. If I was going to face my family in such a setting, I couldn't appear bitter or broken. I had to radiate confidence. I invested in a gown that was subtle yet striking, an emerald green dress that flowed like liquid silk, a color that would stand out without screaming for attention. I had my hair styled professionally, chose elegant accessories, and carried myself with the poise of someone who had nothing to prove yet everything to show. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity. Day of the wedding approached, and with it came a growing tension that I masked beneath calmness. I arrived at the venue early, slipping into the crowd unnoticed at first. The ceremony was grand, flowers cascading from chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly, and guests dressed like royalty. My parents stood proudly near the front, greeting guests as though they were hosting an event worthy of envy. They didn't expect me to look like this. I could tell by the flicker of surprise in my mother's eyes when she saw me, but she quickly covered it with a polite smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. My father gave me a curt nod, and my siblings, well, they barely acknowledged me at all. Good, let them think I was playing along. The ceremony unfolded with predictable grace, vows exchanged under soft lighting, a kiss that sealed their union, applause echoing like a wave. Then came the reception, where speeches and toasts would be made. This was where I planned to make my move. I waited until the moment everyone anticipated, the toast from the parents of the groom. My father stood tall, raising his glass, speaking about family unity, love, and support. Each word was dipped in hypocrisy, each line a performance. The crowd clapped, unaware of the lie being sold to them. Then, as the applause faded, I stepped forward.com/collected, envelope in hand. I didn't make a scene, I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. Instead, I simply approached the head table, placed the envelope in front of my parents, and stepped back. My movements were deliberate, controlled enough to draw eyes but not suspicion. My mother's brow furrowed. My father glanced at me, puzzled, but they couldn't open it yet, not with everyone watching. And that was exactly the point. They had to wait, they had to wonder. And when they finally did open it, the weight of everything inside would hit them like a storm. The rest of the evening unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. Guests mingled, danced, and dined, oblivious to the silent war brewing at the head table. My parents avoided my gaze, but I could feel their tension rising with every passing moment. The envelope sat untouched for most of the evening, until I saw my mother finally slide it closer. her curiosity getting the better of her. She would open it later, I knew, probably when no one was watching. And when she did, she'd see the photos, the screenshots, the recreated portrait, a stark reminder of the daughter they had tried to erase. But the letter would be what truly broke them, because it didn't just demand acknowledgement, it demanded change. By the time I left the venue, I felt a strange mix of emotion, satisfaction, anticipation, and something else I couldn't quite name. This wasn't over. The real reaction hadn't come yet, but it would, and when it did, everything about how my family saw me and how others saw them would change forever. The morning after the wedding, the silence from my family was deafening. No call, no message, no vague social media post about what a beautiful night, just silence, and I knew why. They had opened the envelope, somewhere in the early hours, after the last glass had been collected and the last guest had left. They must have slipped away to a private corner to see what I had handed them. They would have started with the photos, childhood birthdays, vacations, graduations, moments where I had been cropped, blurred, or erased altogether. Images that proved, without a doubt, their deliberate attempt to minimize my place in the family. Then the letter. My words were measured, but they cut deep. I had written, "This is not an accusation. This is a reminder. I was there. I belonged in every memory you tried to erase. You wanted to present a perfect family to the world, but perfection is not built on lies. I won't stay silent anymore. You can continue pretending I don't exist, or you can acknowledge the daughter, the sister, the person who has stood in the shadows while you smiled for the camera." The final piece, the recreated portrait, would have hit them hardest. It was elegant, striking, impossible to dismiss. And it was signed on the back with one simple line, "This is who we really are." By mid-afternoon, I received the first message, not from my parents, but from an aunt. She had been at the wedding and noticed the envelope exchange. Her text was carefully worded, asking if everything was okay and whether I had intended to cause tension. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because what was coming next would speak louder than any response I could give. Hours later, the first crack appeared. My father posted a picture from the wedding, a group shot of the entire family, smiling together. But this time, something was different. For the first time in years, I was in the photo. Not edited, not cropped. Present. It wasn't the recreated portrait. It wasn't an apology. But it was a start. A reluctant, awkward start. I wish I could say the gesture warmed me, but it didn't. Not fully. Because I knew my father wasn't suddenly remorseful. He was fearful of what people would think, of what I might do next. And that fear was only beginning to take root. 2 nights later, my phone rang. My mother's voice was carefully calm, her tone overly measured, like someone rehearsing lines. She said she wanted to meet just us at the old house where we grew up. I agreed, but only because I knew this wasn't going to be a heartfelt reunion. It was going to be a negotiation, and I intended to control it. The house felt smaller than I remembered, its walls holding echoes of a time when I still believed I was wanted. My mother sat across from me at the dining table, the envelope between us like a silent witness. She didn't touch it, but she didn't ignore it either. Her words came slowly, carefully chosen. She admitted that perhaps my feelings were valid, but she framed it as a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, an oversight. She said things like, "You know how pictures are, and we never meant to make you feel excluded." It was a performance, thinly veiled, but I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply listened, nodded, and smiled faintly. Because I had learned something powerful. Silence can be far more unsettling than words. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a hotel and drafted the next step of my plan. The envelope had planted the seed, but I needed roots to grow deeper. I wasn't seeking revenge for the sake of cruelty. I wanted acknowledgement, not just behind closed doors, but in front of the same world where they had erased me. The opportunity came faster than I expected. My brother and his new wife posted a wedding album online, a professionally edited set of images curated for likes and compliments, dozens of smiling faces, elegant poses, and staged moments of family unity. But guess which ones didn't include me? Almost all of them, except one. The group shot my father had posted earlier was there, too, but it was buried among so many others that my presence still felt like an afterthought, a token gesture, a minimal concession. And that was when I knew my family wasn't going to change unless I forced them to. The following week, I reached out to the photographer who had recreated the original family portrait for me. I commissioned something new. Not a photo this time, but a short video montage, a sequence of images that showed every instance where I had been cropped, blurred, or erased, juxtaposed with the full versions where I clearly belonged, layered over soft, nostalgic music. It looked less like revenge and more like a bittersweet plea for recognition, but the ending was what made it powerful. The montage faded to the recreated portrait, whole, complete, followed by one final line in bold, white script. I was always here. The day I posted it online, I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention names. I simply captioned it, "For the families who forget who their children are." Within hours, the video gained traction. Comments poured in, people sharing similar stories of exclusion, heartbreak, and being treated like background characters in their own families. My inbox filled with messages of support from strangers, while silence from my own family grew louder. But by the next morning, that silence shattered after, because my father called. Not to scold, not to threaten, but to say he wanted to meet. And this time, he sounded different. When my father called, his voice carried a weight I had never heard before, either anger nor denial, but something closer to unease. The kind of unease a man feels when control begins to slip through his fingers. He suggested we meet at his office, away from home, away from prying eyes. I agreed, though every instinct told me this wasn't about reconciliation. It was about damage control. The drive there was long enough for doubt to creep in. Not doubt about whether I was right, because I knew I was, but about what I wanted next. Did I want an apology, a confession, or did I want him to finally understand the years of quiet hurt he had chosen not to see? When I stepped into his office, I could tell immediately that he had rehearsed this meeting. Papers were neatly stacked, blinds drawn to block the glare of the sun, a faint smell of polished wood lingering in the air, everything in its place, as if control could be staged. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he stood behind his chair, gripping its back as though steadying himself. His first words weren't apologies. They were questions. Why had I made the video? Why had I posted it publicly? Why had I risked humiliating the family? The choice of words told me everything. Not, "Why were you hurt?" Not, "How did it come to this?" But, "Why did you make us look bad?" My pain was still secondary to their image. I didn't answer right away. I let silence fill the room until it became uncomfortable. I let him feel the weight of my gaze, the quiet defiance in my posture. And when I finally spoke, my words were measured, deliberate, and laced with something I hadn't shown before: resolve. I told him the video wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth. About years of being cut out, not just from pictures, but from memories, decisions, and moments that defined our family. I told him how exhausting it had been to watch my existence edited down to fragments, like I was a guest in my own life. And then I said something that made him sit down, slowly, as though his legs had given out beneath him. I told him the world wasn't seeing anything new. They were simply seeing what I had been living all along. For the first time, my father didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he leaned back and exhaled sharply, staring past me, as though looking for an explanation somewhere on the blank wall behind my head. Then, in a low, almost grudging tone, he admitted something I had never expected. It had started years ago, not as a conscious attempt to erase me, but as a misguided attempt to present a certain image, when I had taken a path different from what he had envisioned, choosing art over law, independence over family tradition. He had felt embarrassed, not ashamed of me, but of how others might perceive me. It sounded hollow, but it was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from him. He claimed the cropping of photos wasn't intentional at first, just careless editing by relatives who favored cleaner shots. But somewhere along the way, it became a habit, a way of curating memories that didn't fully include me. And the more it happened, the easier it was to keep doing, until I became background. His voice faltered on that last word. For a second, I saw something in him, something raw and unguarded. Regret, maybe, or at least the realization of how far things had gone. But regret wasn't enough. I told him I didn't post the video to hurt him. I posted it because I had been invisible for too long. And invisibility has a way of making people forget you're even there. I needed them to remember. And then I added something I hadn't planned. To say something that felt like stepping off a ledge. I told him there was one more envelope. one they hadn't seen yet. His eyes snapped to mine, sharp and questioning. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain what was inside. I simply told him this: the next time the family gathered, I would bring it, and when I opened it, there would be no mistaking who I was, or where I belonged. Then I stood, leaving him behind in that polished office, staring at the door long after I had closed it. That night, as I lay awake, I wondered if I had gone too far or not far enough, because the truth was, the second envelope wasn't ready yet. I didn't even know what form it would take: a letter, a photo, something bigger. But I knew one thing: it had to be final, not a plea, not a threat, a declaration. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. My parents announced they were hosting a family dinner, something grand, formal, and painfully performative. An attempt, no doubt, to smooth over appearances and restore whatever illusion my video had shattered. Invitations went out, calls were made, and whispers spread among relatives who had seen the online storm. And as I read the announcement, a slow, deliberate smile formed on my lips, because this was it: the stage, the audience, the perfect moment to deliver the envelope that would end everything or begin something new. The evening of the family dinner arrived like the slow build of a storm. The house gleamed with artificial warmth, polished silverware, crystal glasses, the faint scent of lilies perfuming the air. My parents had gone all out, not just to host a dinner, but to reclaim control of the narrative. The tension lingered beneath every flicker of candlelight, every forced smile of the arriving guests. I stepped through the door in a deep sapphire dress, elegant, understated but commanding, not for their approval, not for their redemption, but as a visual reminder: I had always belonged. My arrival turned heads, and not just because of the viral video. There was a quiet power in my presence now, one I had cultivated through pain and defiance. My parents greeted me with rehearsed smiles, masking whatever unease still gnawed at them. I greeted them back, composed, carrying the envelope tucked beneath my arm like an unspoken promise. Dinner was served in stifling silence, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery or nervous laughter. The cousins who had commented on the video avoided my eyes. The aunts who had cropped me out of photos shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And my parents, they performed small talk like actors reading lines, but their gazes kept drifting toward me and the envelope. Finally, when the plates were cleared and glasses refilled, I stood. No toast, no introduction, just a quiet, deliberate motion that pulled all attention toward me. I placed the envelope on the table and said without words, "This is the moment." Inside the envelope was not a letter, not a confession, not a confrontation, but a photograph. One that no one at the table had ever seen, not because it was hidden, but because it had never been allowed to exist. It was a composite I had created. An image of my family, every member, every smile, but with one crucial difference. I wasn't cropped out. I wasn't pushed to the corner or blurred in the background. I was front and center, standing tall, my arm looped around my mother, my father's hand resting on my shoulder. A family, whole. A family as it could have been. Below the image, a single line was written: "This is how I will remember us. With or without you." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. My father's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the photo. My mother's eyes glistened, though whether with regret or shame, I couldn't tell. No one spoke. No one dared. I didn't need to explain the message. It wasn't a demand for inclusion. It wasn't a plea for love. It was a declaration of independence from their narrative. If they couldn't see me as part of this family, I would create my own version, one where I was never erased. After a long pause, my father set the photo back down. He didn't apologize. He didn't defend himself. But he didn't look away either. Something had shifted, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of what they had lost, and what I had claimed back for myself. I turned, ready to leave, not in anger, but in finality. The kind of exit that carries no bitterness, only the weight of choice. And as I walked toward the door, I felt lighter, not because they had changed, but because I no longer needed them to. Outside, the night air was cool, cleansing. The house behind me buzzed with uneasy murmurs, the kind that would grow into stories, speculation, maybe even guilt. But none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't longing for a place at their table. I had built my own table, and that I would never be cropped out again. Epilogue. Months later, the viral storm faded, but the message lingered. My photo, the one from the envelope, found a new home, framed in my studio. Visitors often asked if it was real. I never corrected them, because in a way, it was, not as a record of what was, but as a vision of what could have been. And sometimes, that was enough.